Welcome back to another video. This time I'm going to talk about handling. As I've mentioned and alluded to in previous videos, I am not that impressed with the standard handling of the MG ZS EV. It is very wallowy, which gives a nice comfortable ride, which is great, but there just doesn't seem to be any chassis control. When it goes over bumps, it just goes all over the road. It just wanders around the place quite a lot. On one particular road, the car just swung side to side, even when you're hanging on the steering wheel, and it must be terrible for the people in the back. So I reached out to some guys who worked for SAIC, who own MG. They were made redundant about 8-9 months ago whilst they were developing the EV. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to completely finish developing the suspension on the EV before they were made redundant, and SAIC took it all in-house. But they had an idea of what was wrong with the vehicle, but weren't able to do anything about it. So anyway, as I said, I reached out to them. They came and fitted a test set that they've, based on their knowledge of how the car was performing or not performing, as the case may be, over certain road surfaces. They built up a special set of Bilstein dampers for the front and for the rear to control the suspension. And so this morning they fitted them in the snow, well, sleet. Of course, it cleared up later and it's nice and beautiful now. Anyway, we went for a drive beforehand just to confirm my thoughts on the suspension was in alignment with theirs. I'm just going to add a short video of the drive before we changed the suspension, and you can listen to our comments.
Yeah, it's just a little too much motion generally, isn't there, to make you think, well, if I went any quicker, this feels like it would get completely out of control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got a horrible camber coming up in just a moment. So it goes the wrong way. So it slopes off to the left and we go to the right, just here.
Oh, I see, yeah.
And then the car's bumping around, bouncing around.
Yeah, a bit of off camber.
And it feels like the car's got its own mind.
Yeah, yeah.
So it wasn't quite so filthy for when you were working on it, but it rained yesterday afternoon on the way back from East Grinstead. Yeah, and I suppose typically my average journey is probably, I get back home with about 50% battery.
Okay, yeah. So well within a comfortable range.
Yeah. Yes. When we turned right at the green, that triangle,
yeah,
the road, if we carried straight on, it's this road here.
Okay, yeah.
A useful stretch of road surface, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And trying to get the power down.
Yeah.
Okay, I know it's wet.
Yeah. Yeah, there was two things that struck me there. One was, well, it didn't look, unless you were gripping the wheel really heavily, Mike, it looked as though it dealt with that large torque difference across the front when you pulled out quite well, in terms of what we call steer torque corruption. Yeah, you didn't have to compensate much for that inside wheel spinning too much.
No, but the traction control cuts in is quite aggressive.
Yeah.
In a Nissan Leaf, I will be spinning my wheels like mad. This spins a wheel and then it cuts in,
Yeah,
grabs it and stops it.
Yeah.
and then they changed the dampers. They supplied complete springs and dampers to the front because it's McPherson struts at the front, and the back is a torsion beam. Nothing wrong with that. Lots of great cars like the Fiesta ST and the like have a torsion beam at the back. It's all down to the dampers, and the rear torsion beam is down to how rigid it can be, but it also needs to be able to flex a little, being the nature of how it's built. And so all they did was just replace the dampers. So we then went out for a drive after the dampers had been fitted. Feeling a lot more controlled down here.
Yeah.
Whereas before it was very definitely going from side to side. I mean, there's still a bit of that, but
Yeah.
it's not as uncontrolled as it was before.
Yeah. Yeah, it does. Most of the motions are attenuated much more quickly, aren't they? So yeah, it's not pushing in so far in the first place, and then the aftershock, the after motion, if you like, is settling down more quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, sitting in the back, almost the most noticeable thing is it's not firing out into rebound. You know, we're not travelling up as much. It's,
Yep.
yeah. So you sit into the bump, but then coming out of it, it's already attenuating. So it's not making me feel as though I'm going to leave the seat as it gets to the top of its travel.
Yeah.
Not making you quite as car sick, basically.
Just, everything's over and done with that bit quicker, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The wheels feel like they're staying more in contact with the road.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's through the right-hander going downhill. It felt nicely controlled there, I thought. In that the body in roll felt quite stable, but the wheel motion at the front particularly felt. I could sense the wheel motion, but in roll we felt stable.
Yeah. And the transformation was astonishing, actually. I was really pleased. There is so much more body control. Yes, the ride is slightly harsher around town because the tyres are actually staying in contact with the road or much more of the time, and therefore you're feeling more of the road surface. However, when you hit a bump, the suspension reacts much quicker, and the car doesn't get unsettled like it could do on certain road surfaces and conditions, which I've read about in many of the reports that they actually criticise the suspension for exactly that. Which, based on my short experience, we only did a sort of 10-mile test drive, but based on that, on 30 and 40, 50 mile an hour roads, it is so much tauter. There is much more control. I never felt out of control, unlike when I was with the standard suspension on certain roads. Plus, with the standard suspension, if you hit a bump going round a bend, this back end can actually step out, causing a little bit of sort of oversteer. It's a bit alarming when it happens. That now appears to have been eradicated because, as I say, the suspension reacts so much faster. These Bilstein units are so much stiffer. They're of a monotube design rather than the standard twin tube design, which means that they have a much bigger volume of oil, and so they work much more effectively, basically. So they controlled the body much better. The back wasn't wallowing around anywhere near as much. It wasn't reaching the bump stops all the time, which it seems to do as standard. It was just a much more impressive because the dampers are bigger. The actual tubes or the rods going up and down inside them are larger. It also makes the car stiffer and the steering is a lot more precise, which is a big bonus, which is hardly surprising. So overall, really chuffed. You're going to ask me the cost now, aren't you? That is to be decided at a later date. At the moment, they fitted them to my car. It's being used as a test mule, and I'll run it for a month or so and see how I get on. And if necessary, they'll tweak it, but I want it more for comfort rather than sportiness. I just wanted more control over the primarily the rear end, but the front end wasn't that much better either, and this seems to have transformed it. So I'm really looking forward to taking it on drives in the future and see how it compares. And my wife will also have a drive and also have a ride, and she will give her verdict as well. So in the back, the rear passengers had complained of sort of being car sick because of the wallowy nature of the ride, but now it's a much firmer, not uncomfortably firm, but it just gives it, the car just feels much tighter. It gives me confidence when going through bends. Now, bearing in mind that all the roads I drove on today were either sleety, wet, and not particularly pleasant, but on the second drive, it was very much more composed. Really impressed. So I'll give you an update on this in a few weeks when I've had more chance to test them out on other road surfaces. So far I've only taken them through towns on what supposedly are smooth roads, but they weren't particularly smooth even in the MG. Now, I'm not saying the car's uncomfortable. The car is very comfortable and always has been. It's just that the chassis was not controlling the car, so it just wallows a bit. So the springs to me are just about right, and they have not modified the springs. What they did do is supply a couple of springs so that when they put the units in, all they had to do was just swap out the units at the front, and the dampers, they just replaced the dampers at the rear. It took them about 2.5 hours to fit both the units. You have to do some work to the front to loosen the bolts at the top mountings, but like a lot of modern cars, at the back the dampers can be accessed without having to take any wheels off or even inside the car. So big thumbs up so far, really impressed. And so good job done by Vehicle Handling Solutions, Andy and Al there, really impressed. This is just a short update on the car after 50 miles of mixed town driving, motorway driving and A and B roads. So my initial thoughts are, it's a different car. It's really nice. It's what it should have been in the first place. It feels really taut at the back end, especially when you go over humps. It doesn't spend ages swinging up and down. Okay, it probably didn't swing up and down for ages, but that's what it felt like before. It just feels so much more controlled. The car feels taut. It feels fun to drive now. I'm really impressed with it so far, but I say I'm only 50 miles in. And this is just a quick update following on from yesterday's fitting of the suspension. So they are original equipment specification, however the damping rates are slightly changed, because the dampers are slightly beefier and monotube rather than twin tube, and because they are monotube as opposed to twin tube of the standard original equipment on the MG, they have a lot more control over the amount of oil that can go through them, and therefore the dampers are a lot more effective. And yeah, so it's made a vast improvement. I'm really impressed so far, but say let's give it a few more weeks and see how it goes. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll speak to you again soon.